Hello, and welcome back to today's episode where I'm going to be talking about why it could be that you're eating healthy but not seeing any fat loss results as a smaller woman. So, a lot of women that I speak to who are 5'4" under feel like they are doing the classic everything right, making mindful choices with their food, eating clean. I don't really like that phrase, but it's a very common phrase, clean eating, eating healthy, but still aren't seeing the weight loss that they want. And they can't understand why, even though they've made these changes, they're not seeing progress. So maybe you do feel like you've been eating clean, or maybe you've made an effort to cut out sugar or reduce sugar or cut out carbs. Maybe you don't even eat that much or eat out that much. Maybe you make everything at home. Maybe you make healthy choices, or something I hear a lot is that, I don't eat junk food. And I get why this is really frustrating, because this can be true. I'm not suggesting that actually, no, you probably are eating unhealthy foods or junk foods or eating out, whatever. But here's the thing. Eating healthy doesn't automatically mean you are in a calorie deficit, especially when you are shorter and the margin for error is smaller. So someone who is taller than you, or maybe in a bigger body than you, may have been able to make these small changes and see really great results. But when you are smaller, your food choices matter more, the structure matters more, and particularly so does portion awareness. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the most common reasons I see short women who are eating healthy but still not seeing progress, and how to fix it. So first of all, healthy foods can be quite calorie dense. So I'm talking about things that are good fats. So like your nuts, seeds, granola, oils, avocados, smoothies. These are all good fats and they should be included in your diet, but in a quantity or in an amount that is aligned with your calorie deficit. So you might not think you're eating that much because the actual size or the portion size of the food doesn't really feel like it's a lot. So, a handful of nuts could be up to close to 200 calories. Or, you might just be putting on olive oil on your pan before you're cooking. That, just putting it on without being aware of how much you're putting on, could be an extra 200 calories. And, maybe you're having avocado on toast for breakfast. That could easily wipe out your whole deficit. It's really important to understand how many calories are within these foods, because for a smaller woman, even if it's just an extra 200 calories, that could impact, maybe depending on how small you are and what your deficit is, that could be your whole deficit, or that could be almost all of your deficit. One other thing that I often see as well is portion distortion. And, it's very normal. I see it in myself too sometimes. Like, for example, 1 teaspoon of peanut butter could be 50 calories, or 1 teaspoon of peanut butter could be 150 calories. But in your head, it's still only 1 teaspoon of peanut butter. And the differentiation there, again, could really eat into your calorie deficit. So first of all, it's remembering that these healthy foods do have, calories. And, you can end up with a salad with lots of different healthy and healthy good fat superfoods that could end up being almost 1,000 calories. So be aware of the quantities of these healthy foods that you're using and portion sizes. And that's the first thing to be aware of. Now, the second thing that I see is that even though you're eating healthy, maybe not eating junk or anything like that, there is no meal structure. I am a big advocate for flexible dieting. However, the magic lies in the combination of having structure and flexibility. That is the golden ticket. And I use a framework within my coaching called the Flexible Day Framework. And that allows you to have structure for most of the day, but flexibility around dinner. Because otherwise, if there's no structure, what tends to happen, if it's not the portion distortion, having larger portions for each meal, we tend to try and minimize how much we're eating. And then what happens is we end up grazing, maybe having random meals, or maybe like snacking on foods while you're cooking, or eating your kids' crusts. And it all adds up. Even if it doesn't feel like it's that much. Those kind of foods or that kind of way of eating doesn't really fill you up all the time. So it's kind of consistent, and it can just be a small bit of this, a handful of that can really add up. And you will think, I'm not eating that much. And that is not just you. That is not a you problem. Even they've done studies, and even nutritionists underreport on average 400 calories a day of how much they're eating, which for a small woman could be or is likely your entire deficit, maybe even more. So flexibility without structure can turn into overeating quite quickly. So you want to start to structure your food properly, avoid consistent snacking, avoid grazing, and sit down and have your meals. Something else to be aware of is the lack of protein. And it is really common in women to undereat on protein. I remember my mum said to me once, she said, nuts have protein in them, don't they? And the quantity, you'd have to eat a huge quantity of nuts to get a decent amount of protein in them. They're a good, tiny little top up. But then we come back to the problem earlier of, a huge quantity of nuts have a huge quantity of calories in them. And this is not to frighten you away from eating nuts. Please, I don't want you to think that you can't eat any of these foods, but just being aware of the portion sizes. And for example, we think things like eggs have protein in them. Yes, they do. But one egg only has 6 grams of protein in it. And if you're having 2 eggs at breakfast, that's still only 12 grams. We want to be aiming for at least 25 grams per meal. Protein helps us feel satiated, so it's going to keep you feeling fuller for longer. So that's going to stop the grazing. It's also going to increase your metabolism through 2 different ways. And it may only be a small amount, but when you're smaller, every little helps. First of all, muscle retention. We need protein to maintain our muscle. If we're not eating protein and resistance training, when we're in a deficit, we are going to be losing muscle. When you have less muscle, you have a lower metabolic rate because muscle is metabolically expensive. So you burn more calories when you have more muscle. The second reason is protein has a higher thermic effect of food. So protein requires more calories for your body to burn to digest it. So when you're eating enough protein, as well as feeling more full, and a number of other great healthy benefits that of course has, in terms of being in your deficit, it's going to help you stay within that deficit because it's going to increase how many calories that you burn. Most smaller women overall should be eating at least 90 grams of protein a day. And that's for anyone maybe 5 foot or under. Ideally, I would say blanket women in general, especially smaller women, should be trying to hit that 100 grams a day mark. Over that is great, not always necessary, depending on, your current weight. But most of us are missing that mark. It's very common for us to probably sit closer around the 40 to 50 grams, which is half what we actually need a day. And even me, I'm very conscious of the protein that I eat, but I notice when I am not tracking my intake or planning on my meals, it's easy for it to fall short. So it's not a surprise that for many women it is short. And things lots of us are quite conscious of how much red meat we eat for the environment. So, maybe we're eating meat less because, we want to help the environment. So it's about getting creative with other ways that you can get your protein in without necessarily eating meat, which there are other ways. Things like Greek yogurt, or just little top-ups like adding edamame beans. In terms of vegetables, it's not super high protein, but they're good top-ups. Broccoli, lots of mushrooms, peas, they are going to help top up your protein in your meal. Cottage cheese, that's a really good high protein. Parmesan, these kind of things, if you include them in your meal in the right quantity, it means that you don't always have to just rely on that meat source. Of course, fish is great as well, but I'm digressing a little bit here. We're not going into that too much. So that was just a bit of an example. And then the last thing to be aware of is what I like to call the drift. So these are the extra calories that we kind of forget that are coming in, a little bit. aligned with the mindless kind of eating, the grazing. But these are things like, liquid calories. Many of us are really mindful what we're eating, but if you're having 2-3 lattes a day, you know, that could wipe out your entire deficit. Even just having an oat mocha, again, that could potentially be half of your deficit. So being mindful of the liquid calories that you are consuming, being mindful of social eating and weekends. A lot of us really just do focus on Monday to Friday. And then when the weekend hits, any kind of awareness kind of goes out the door. But you feel like you've made a conscious effort for most of the week. So why shouldn't you be getting to your goals? Well, the drift that happens at the weekend, it's, you know, if it starts Friday and ends Sunday night, that's like a third of your week, even if it doesn't feel like it. And it's easier to overeat at these times. And all of these things can still be enjoyed, but without structure or mindfulness around them, they can add up. When you reflect, you mainly think of the conscious efforts that you make. Like those are more like alert in your brain, and you forget that it's the here and there that make a difference. I had a client say to me once, she was telling me a story. We were really focusing on reducing mindless snacking, and bringing this awareness did change it. She said there was one point where she just was in the fridge and she was like going to eat the bits of calamari from last night's dinner, and then she was eating it, and then she didn't even realize that that was just what she was doing. And it was only afterwards that we started to dissect it. But like, that's the level of mindless eating. Like, you know, like I said, eating your kid's crust or snacking on foods while you're waiting for your dinner to cook. These are all the things that add up. So if you are a short woman who feels like you're eating healthy, but you still feel stuck, it isn't that you're not putting in enough effort, because I know you're putting in enough effort, and I know that you are trying to be conscious of that and work towards your goals. But it's the things like the structure and potentially awareness or understanding or education around food and calories that are letting you down. When you understand how to structure your calories properly, how to structure your meals properly, fat loss starts to become more predictable and it starts to become easy. And things like, you know, instead of having half an avocado, you might have a quarter of an avocado. And that just starts to, you aware of those portion sizes. So if this episode resonated with you, I have created a free guide explaining why fat loss is harder when you're 5'4" and under, and the 3 dials you can adjust to start making progress. So I'm going to link that in the show notes for you to download, and you can have a read over it. And I would always love to hear any feedback. So if there's anything that resonates with you or anything that you're like, oh wow, I didn't even know that, let me know. You can send me a message on Instagram. You can send me a message on YouTube. You can send me a message on or comment on the episode on Spotify. Email me, whatever you like. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I hope this episode was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.